Hi, everyone. Welcome to Waste 360's Nothing Wasted podcast. On every episode, we invite the most interesting people in waste, recycling, and organics to sit down with us and chat candidly about their thoughts, their work, this unique industry, and so much more. So thanks for listening and enjoy this episode.
And now please welcome the brilliant Susan Robinson, Senior Director of Sustainability and Policy for Waste Management.
Thank you. Thanks to Waste 360, Waste Expo. Thanks to Liz, who's not here. Mark, I appreciate it. I got a note from Liz last night, and she's just really sad about not being here. So yeah, she really has put her heart and soul into it. I'm thrilled to be here today. Thank you so much. I lead our sustainability team at Waste Management. I think I'm over 30 years in the industry, and really starting out with I worked for a nonprofit environmental organization, so it's really kind of at the core of what I've done for my whole career. So this is just really exciting to have this event here, and we're really looking forward to it, and I just hope it's the first of many to come. So let's get started. I think of our industry, we have so many things that we do that are so integral to sustainability and to climate change. You think about the material we manage is a key topic in the climate change discussion. We employ a really diverse workforce, and we work in every community across America. We touch the lives of our customers in so many ways. Our work impacts and protects health and safety, air quality, water quality, and even soil quality. What we do is very visible, and this is really important. We should expect to be in the spotlight, and we need to be prepared. We shouldn't wait for the spotlight to find us. So I thought I'd start the day today with a pretty practical overview of what that looks like. Hopefully this can shape your thinking as you listen to all these great speakers that we have today. So really my first slide here. What is the big deal about sustainability? So we used to think of it as, when we referred to it as a three-legged stool, people, planet, and profit. And especially for our industry, really it's been about the environment, right? Well, you know what's really interesting? There's a growing understanding, and there's data to prove it, and I'll show you some of that this morning, that actually profit is impacted by how we manage our business, our impact on the environment, and how we treat our employees and the communities in which we work. We are being held accountable for all aspects of our business. Our investors, our customers, and our regulators and policymakers are increasing their expectations for more public reporting, and we'll probably see more regulated requirements about reporting as well. And several lawsuits have accused brands of greenwashing with their labeling, which has drawn attention to the need to be very accurate with our words. It's not enough to just talk about what we're doing. We actually have to provide the support that shows it. And for a publicly traded company like Waste Management, that means dedicating more time, more effort, and more staff to reporting and to thinking strategically about what I call the business of sustainability. I truly believe the next decade will reshape our industry. Maybe not in the ways we've been thinking it would, but climate change related legislation and customer expectations will definitely change how we all operate. So what is sustainability in 2021? The word used to be synonymous with the environment, right? However, today, sustainability embraces people, planet, and governance, or how we manage every single part of our business. It's really every single thing that we do. So now we have a relatively new acronym, and it's kind of interesting that some people use it every day and it's part of our just daily conversation. Others have no clue what I'm talking about when I say ESG, environmental, social, and governance. Companies like Waste Management are expected to pay attention to each of these, the E, the S, and the G. And in fact, our investors and our stakeholders use ESG ratings to evaluate and measure our performance, and they expect that we have good ESG performance. And if you think about it, this makes a lot of sense. Companies that are well managed, that have good employee relations, that take care of their customers, that take care of the environment, tend to be lower risk, right? And they also tend to be better business partners. So one of the things I love is the connectivity between people and the environment. Quite simply, when our employees and our communities have their needs met, they have more bandwidth to care about the environment as well. So it just makes sense. I'm going to talk later on in the presentation about environmental justice and how it plays a really important role in that connectivity between our operations and the communities in which we operate. EJ sets the stage for this holistic view of sustainability, and that 360-degree look is really, really important. Taking care of people and the environment just makes sense. So how does this all relate to our industry? I think we've been nibbling around the edges of this really for years. Our customers have asked us to provide more services to reduce their impact on the environment, and regulators are paying more attention to how we operate. First, let's start with the E, environment. Our customers are setting climate change goals, and they need us to do the same in order to meet their own goals. Service offerings such as recycling and organics play an important role in those services to our customers. They need them if they're going to achieve their goals, and they also want us to give them more data so that then they can report as well. Next, social, the S of the ESG. Employee and community programs have taken center stage. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, hiring and training are table stakes in our business these days. Employee benefits will determine whether we are an employer of choice. And in this day and age with our labor challenges, that is critically important. And finally, governance. Somebody asked me the other day about governance, and sustainability starts at the top with leadership. Our investors, our ESG ratings, they're looking at leadership diversity and compensation incentives tied to sustainability. They're looking for transparent reporting and ESG policies. Finally, as regulations are driving change in our industry, investors are looking at what we call a transition risk. Are we preparing for the transition that we expect associated with climate change and climate change regulations? So why now? Why this focus on sustainability now? Over the last few years, the environmental and social threats associated with climate change have gained a lot of visibility. In the US, I think about this: hurricanes, superstorms, fires, and floods are impacting our operations, our employees, and our customers. Many of us live in parts of the country where we've really felt this personally, and that personal impact makes it also real, that it starts to impact how we feel about what's happening with broader climate change goals. Unfortunately, I've taken to say in our industry, we do disaster planning and response very well because we have a lot of experience with it. Other industries are also being increasingly impacted, and I think one situation that really plays into where we are today with ESG ratings and the scrutiny, the microscope on it, is PG&E. So PG&E declared bankruptcy after the fires in California. And before that, previously, that had very high ESG ratings. And so it's really made investors look more deeply at data and what influences those ratings, and particularly the governance aspect of companies and their ESG efforts. So we're seeing more analysis of the real cost of climate change, and a couple things I thought were really interesting. There were 22 climate events in 2020 that cost more than $1 billion per year in the 1 year. The US government spent $450 billion on disaster assistance between 2005 and 2019. Estimates of the global cost of climate disasters over 2 decades exceeded $2 trillion, and there's an expectation of $8 trillion more that will be spent globally by 2050. And as the costs increase, the burden is felt by both the private and the public sector. So let's talk a little bit about who cares about all this, and let's start with regulators and policymakers. First, our regulators and policymakers we see this proliferation of laws and rules that affect our business. At the federal level, President Biden is taking an unprecedented action to move his climate change agenda forward. And he's looking for ways to do that even if he can't bring Congress alongside with him. In May, he signed an executive order on climate, directing his administration to design a strategy to measure and mitigate the financial risks associated with climate change. And at the state level, we generally see more activity faster there. States move a little faster. We have 33 states already that have climate action plans. Some of them are a little farther along than others, quite frankly, but I look to the West Coast, where there are states that have very specific plans to make sure that they reduce their emissions by no more than 45%, below their 1990 levels by 2035, and by as much as 80% by 2050. New York has a very aggressive plan, and they actually have right now an advisory board that's working on the implementation efforts around that to keep their emissions to reduce their emissions by 85% by 2050. And Massachusetts has recently made a commitment to get to net zero by 2050. So there's a lot going on at the state level, and that impacts us dramatically. Some of these states have part of their regulations call for restrictions on fossil fuels, on landfill emissions, and a lot of them will need to implement additional regulations around organics management as well. So we are at the center of this discussion, and it's critically important that we're engaging and understanding how these changes will impact us and what we can do to help mitigate the changes associated with climate. Next, who cares? Investors. And in fact, this is an important one. I would say it's the investor community that coined the phrase ESG, quite frankly. Why? Because they've seen that companies that perform well on ESG performance metrics have reduced volatility, they have better financial results, and they have better shareholder value. Vanguard and BlackRock, which are actually two of the largest investors and two of our largest investors, their ESG funds have outperformed the rest of their funds. The demonstrated outperformance on the upside and the resilience on the downside have made ESG a pervasive megatrend driving markets, public policy, and business strategy. And as a result, investors are demanding more transparency on reporting. They're hiring analysts to review our data that we report on, and they're asking questions about our governance, environmental services, and employee programs. I heard one investor organization say, or one group I'm on, say that some companies have as many as 100 analysts that are really just spending their time looking at ESG metrics and data, and they're using that to make recommendations on their investments. The effort graph shows that there's a 91% increase in investors adopting ESG into their investing decisions. It isn't just about emissions reductions goals either. It includes our hiring policies. It includes how we report on our political contributions, our trade organizations that we belong to. It includes reporting on safety data, on customer satisfaction data, and on our board and senior executive gender and race diversity. ESG leadership is not easy. And in fact, I'm going to spend a little more time on this in a few minutes, but it requires some really uncomfortable conversations within our internal companies. And I will tell you, it is what makes us better. It will make us better. So many of you have probably heard of the Larry Fink letter, As climate change has increased as a global concern, investors are weighing in. And Larry Fink is leading the pack on that. He's the CEO of the world's largest investment fund, BlackRock Investments. In 2021, in his annual letter to CEOs, he asked companies to disclose their plan for how their business model will get them to a net zero economy. Where global warming is limited to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050. And then he followed up with a statement that said he would not support or vote for boards that did not create those plans. So he's working for his company to kind of put their voting where their priorities are. And then this, I think, is a really interesting one. This is from Deutsche Bank, and it's a 2021 report that noted for the first time in the World Economic Forum's reporting history, all of the top 5 long-term risks by likelihood were about the environment. Previously, they'd all been about financial risk. For the first time, all those risks were environmental risks. And then another just interesting note that really ties into this discussion from the same report, a data point, is about millennials as investors. They note that the pending transfer of $2 trillion in assets from baby boomers to millennials is really critical because millennials care about sustainable investing. They will invest differently. They will be looking at sustainability when they're making their investments. So next, and importantly, who cares? Our customers care. Certainly, they have asked for, and we have responded by providing more services to them. Again, our recycling services, our composting service. We're transitioning to CNG trucks. We're running those CNG trucks on renewable natural gas. But there's another really important evolution taking place here. The public pressure created by customer demand that links back to that public policy and those regulations. According to global data company Workiva, 67% of respondents feel ESG will continue to become more important in the climate change dialogue. Over half of the respondents noted ESG in companies has become more important in the last year, and even more so for the 18 to 34-year-old age group. 69% of respondents believe that ESG will become more important because of climate change. And consumers are making decisions accordingly. 79% are changing their purchasing preferences based on social and environmental impacts, and 57% have paid a higher price for a sustainability product or service. This all works its way to our industry. Policymakers realize they must respond to consumer pressure and are passing legislation, which is why we are seeing more legislation at the federal level and more at the state level than we have ever seen in my 30-plus year career. And also many of our national accounts customers are asking us to help them meet their customer demands as well. So this is all really playing out through our industry. So what does this mean for our industry? Well, as I said, we play a really important role in mitigating the impact of climate change. So let's start there. We need to prepare first for an increase in regulations, and we need to prepare to be more transparent and to understand the landscape of what I call the business of sustainability. You know, I know a lot about a lot of things, but I have staff that knows the business of sustainability, and it really is. It's a whole kind of profession in and of itself. First thing is calculating your company's carbon footprint. Next, setting sustainability or ESG goals. Then begin to report on your progress to achieving those goals and understand the terminology, the expectations, and the players. As you start to research these expectations, you learn what publicly available policies are expected of us regarding our hiring, our training, our supply chain, safety, and even more. One important lesson I've learned is that responding to these reports and their requirements forces us to take internal action, which makes us better. And I'm going to see if I can kind of convey something I've been stewing on. We're in reporting season right now. We're also looking at restating our goals. We just made a big acquisition last year, and so we're going to have to reset some of our baseline goals anyway. And one of the things I've noticed over the last several years as I've worked on our sustainability reporting at Waste Management is that there's an interesting chicken and egg relationship between ESG and our operations. So every year we fill out dozens of questionnaires. These get used by raters and rankers, and then the investors look at those ratings and that information, and they make investment decisions accordingly. So in other words, filling out those surveys is really important because it ends up being seen by stakeholders that are really important to our company. So one of the things that we're finding is the questions being asked in these questionnaires. They ask us to set goals. They're asking us if we have some very specific goals. They're asking us to report very publicly on our progress towards achieving them. And they're also asking us about programs and policies that we may not have considered before, and we certainly may not have been interested in reporting publicly. So I'll give you one simple example about the goal dialogue. We report on our Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions. So our emissions associated with our operations, our emissions, our Scope 2 emissions are around our electricity use, and Scope 3 is around our supply chain. Our Scope 2 emissions around electricity are really small. We don't use a lot of electricity, so we haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it. But it turns out that's important to the rating agencies on the Scope 2 emissions and having a renewable electricity goal. So 2 years ago, because we were asked in our reporting process, we set a goal to use 100% renewable electricity by 2025. That then spurs us to create a plan and to track every year and to start to make the changes we need to to ensure that we're using 100% renewable electricity by 2025. So the second one is really our Dow Jones reporting every year. We are noticing a lot more questions being asked of us and a lot more pressure to report things publicly. So this trend towards increasing transparency can drive some pretty tough internal conversations. The request for information for transparency is not natural to many companies. We see it as sharing confidential information. That is really not the intent. The intent is to basically force us to consider programs, consider efforts, to create goals, and to publicly make a statement and track your progress towards your goals. Why is that? Because then we do it, right? It really encourages us to move along that path. I see this insidious transparency as the way we will achieve our climate goals. So I see it as a really positive thing. A couple of examples I think about. ESG reporting draws attention to the impacts of our operations and the risks associated with them. This drives us to focus on improving and fine-tuning those reduction efforts. It also does another important thing. It allows us to see through the ESG lens of our customers, and they count on our services to help them achieve their goals. And so it really helps us make those investments and understand how important it is that we're providing those services to our customers. And in fact, we actually, a couple of years ago, we set new goals really with this in mind. We reframed them to broader sustainability and climate change, and we set 2038 long-term goals as well as 2025 shorter-term goals. We added new diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, and now we're reporting on those and tracking that progress every single year. So let's talk about goals for a minute. It's a pretty interesting one. As I said, we've been kind of revisiting some of ours, and it really has made us look around and kind of see what's out there. The Paris Climate Agreement, as we know, was established in 2016, and it set a global, basically imperative of keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius, below it by 2050. So after the US pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, corporate America jumped on board to say, we're still in. We are going to keep the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. And we saw these bold statements of goals being made by corporations across America. It's been a little bit of the wild, wild west out there, quite frankly, in the goal-setting world. As a result, there was a realization that we probably needed some protocols out there to set kind of the expectations for what those goals look like and define them and define how we go about achieving them. So the Science Based Target Initiative is the organization that's establishing those protocols, and that includes reducing and offsetting emissions. So now here we are lately, we are hearing this terminology net zero goals, right? The proliferation of net zero goals about how we're going to offset and avoid emissions as well as reduce them to get to a net zero goal. So SBTI, there really is no common definitions around that, so they are in the process of developing protocols for net zero emissions, which should be out by 2022, and we have made a commitment to set a net zero goal by early 2022. So we also find that a lot of other investors and stakeholders are expecting us to set these SBTI goals as well. So before I wrap up, I'm going to switch gears for a minute, and I talk about environmental justice, or EJ. It's a topic that I believe will have significant impacts for all of our industry, for all of our businesses. For those of you who haven't been exposed to the dialogue around environmental justice, the EPA defines it as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people regarding race, color, national origin, or income with respect to development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. A lot of words there. Our industry operates in facilities and communities of all types across North America. The relationships that we have with our communities in which we operate is critically important. Several years ago, Waste Management developed guidance for our local operations. We also started working with EPA and other stakeholders to develop their environmental justice tools, including an EJ screen mapping tool. For over a decade now, we've mapped all of our sites in the U.S. using this tool and publish that data every year in our sustainability report. So in 2021, the stakes are increasing, the stakes are rising. New Jersey passed a trend-setting new environmental justice legislation that's being copied and looked at and improved upon by other states across the country, and there's a lot of attention at the federal level as well. President Biden recently directed the White House Council on Environmental Quality to develop a climate and economic justice screening tool and to annually publish interactive maps highlighting disadvantaged communities. This is happening at the same time we are being asked to work with our facilities to do more in our operations to help meet climate change goals. I would say for us, environmental justice and developing those great programs and policies to work with our local communities will be the most important thing that we've done. No matter how much we've done in the past, it's probably not enough. We are going to need to do more, and we will be asked to do more. This slide is just a quick little overview on the left. It's kind of the scatter mapping we do every year, and we're expanding that this year. We've had requests to provide more data this year on our sites. And you can see on the right there, those are actually reports that anybody who has a facility here, you can plug in the address and you can pull up information on your demographics, socioeconomic information about each of those sites. So it's all publicly available right now. So, to wrap up, where do we go from here? I've covered a lot, and that's because sustainability covers a lot. My team works closely with all parts of our organization, every single part of it, but in 2021, as we're being asked to do more, we are realizing that we have to do more as well. So some trends to keep an eye on. First, disclosure, mandatory disclosure. Based on trends in Europe and the increased financial risks associated with climate change and other risks, and other social risks, regulators are moving rapidly towards mandatory disclosure for many non-financial ESG metrics, such as climate risk, gender, and social diversity, racial diversity. Next, integrated reporting. Related to disclosure, expect to see more financial and non-financial reporting requirements, and a lot of organizations are actually working together to try to streamline that process. Third, emissions reductions. Expect regulations around reducing our absolute emissions. We need to be prepared to make sure that we're ready to do just that. And then finally, environmental justice. Environmental justice will affect all aspects of our operations, and we need to work to make sure that we ensure equitable support for our community partners. So I'm going to wrap up there.
Thank you for listening. It would mean the world if you would take a moment to rate or review this podcast. And if you share it with us on one of our social networks, we are giving out some fun, nothing wasted podcast swag. So just tag us and see what you get. Thanks so much.